All right, take it away, Kyle.
Awesome. Cool. Can everybody see the presentation? Not sure what screen you
Yep.
guys can see. Cool. Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Amanda, for having me. Definitely appreciate it. Wish I was in Houston. But unfortunately, I'm still stuck over here in Santa Clara. But yeah, so my name's Kyle McCormick. I lead our marketing technology team here at Palo Alto Networks. My team's really responsible for the Marketo instance globally. So we have about 400 marketers within our marketing department. About 150 of them are within Marketo. So my team is the main Marketo admins, system admins with Marketo. We're also responsible for all of our marketing technology stack. So any tools that we want to onboard, bring into the marketing team, will go through me and my team to kind of vet, approve, make sure we're not duplicating tools, having two tools that do the same thing. What else? Team's also responsible for Marketo landing page development. So I have a team of developers on my team build landing pages, doing QA, doing data entry for list uploads. And yeah, that's M&A. That's kind of another big one. So in the last 3 years, we've acquired about 10 different companies. So all M&A activity from our acquisitions will go through me and my team. So database migrations, which has been really unique, getting insight into Marketo, HubSpot, Eloqua, Pardot. All the companies that we've acquired have used all the different marketing automation platforms. So it's been really unique to see what some of the other platforms do. As Amanda mentioned, I'm a 3-time Marketo champion. I've been using Marketo for about 8 years now. So Marketo is kind of the main tool that I built my entire career on. So don't have a ton of experience with some of the other tools outside of the M&A. But Marketo is kind of the one thing that I've been taught and learned throughout my entire career. And then a little bit about Palo Alto Networks. So we were 2019 Marketo Revvy Marketing Team of the Year. We are the global leader in cybersecurity, about a $4.5–5 billion company. We have about 10,500 employees globally, headquartered in Santa Clara, California, but we have offices throughout the globe, Amsterdam, Singapore, Japan, everywhere, Australia. So we're definitely a global company, working in all the different regions. So a lot of my presentation will go through how to scale Marketo efficiently. But some of my other experience before this, I was at Logarithm, which was actually a smaller cybersecurity company. When I joined, we were about 200 employees. When I left, we were at 750. So having that experience from working at both kind of a smaller, not really startup, but smaller enterprise all the way to a global enterprise, a lot of the things I talk about, I brought from Logarithm to Palo Alto Networks. So it definitely helps to scale your Marketo instance. Cool. So just quick overview. There's 3 kind of main tools or 3 topics that I want to go through in this presentation. Building for performance, everyday hacks, and then some QA, kind of a 1-question quiz at the end. So hope you guys are ready. But it's something that I never really learned until last year. So it's kind of a little pain point. So I want to see how many people actually know what's going to happen here. So building for performance. Again, I kind of broke this down into a couple of different subsections. These are kind of the things that I've brought with me from Logarithm doing at Palo Alto Networks. Really helps you keep a clean Marketo instance. Nothing worse than growing super quick. And it's like, great, now Marketo is not ready to handle what we're doing. So I think a lot of these things will help streamline your processes within Marketo, but also kind of elevate your instance and what you're doing in marketing to the next level. So this one's kind of basic naming convention. But I do see, I've talked to a lot of people, especially in the Marketo community, that there's no true naming convention within any of their marketing programs. And it becomes extremely difficult to try to find anything. We have about 10,000 active programs within our Marketo instance. And without a naming convention, it's impossible to find anything. So searching, consistency, outside reporting, a naming convention will help you make sure that you can accomplish all of these goals, but also not spending a ton of time trying to find something within the instance. So I have a couple of ideas that we've done to have a defined naming convention. Operating programs always do something separate. I think that makes it a lot easier to know which one's an operation program. We have 100 marketers within Marketo. If we didn't have a clean naming convention for our operational programs, chances are someone's going to go in, turn something off, change a smart flow or a smart campaign, it's going to happen. So having a clean naming convention, especially for those operational programs as traffic managers, makes it very easy to know exactly what you're editing, and try to avoid any mistakes. Naming convention for emails and landing pages, and then have a Google Doc naming convention creator. So in the next slide, I'll actually go through our live example. I think it's about a year old now, but it's still a very accurate representation of how we use Google Sheets to have a naming convention. You can easily share it. It just makes it easy to make sure that everyone that's creating a Marketo program is using the naming convention. So just some questions to ask before you create your naming convention. What do you search for the most? One thing for us is we have a Salesforce campaign for almost every single thing that we do. So for us, the Salesforce campaign ID is one of the easiest ways to have in the naming convention, because the ID never changes, right? If you have a new Salesforce campaign ID, it's probably a new asset, probably a new year. So that was one thing that we knew right away, that having a Salesforce campaign ID is one of the easiest things to search, because Salesforce is public. You can easily go and grab the ID and then search Marketo for that ID. Asset type, depending on if it's an online event, in person, we use abbreviation. So online event would be OE, in-person event would be IPE, just to have it shortened so the naming convention isn't super long. Date, I've actually gone back and forth on. This one makes it a little tricky, I think. In the past, we've always done the date the asset was created. But there's some assets that, it lives for a very long time. Maybe it's a total cost of ownership calculator that we implemented 3 years ago. But something like that, it gets a little confusing having the date in, because if you have 2017 as a date or 2018, it's just one of those things like mentally like, oh, this isn't the right one because it's old. So date's one of those things where I kind of go back and forth, but event date is one thing, it's an event, right? It's static in time. So that's where I would put a date in there to make it easy to find. And also when you're in the Marketo tree, it starts based on the date or based on the naming convention. And then again, unique ID, this kind of goes back to the Salesforce campaign ID, but if we're doing, Splash, so we use Splash for our event platform, we obviously use On24 and Zoom. Those IDs are something else that would make it easy to put into the naming convention, just because you can search it. A lot of times a requester will say, hey, I have this webinar ID. Can you tell me what the Marketo program is? It's much easier just to search that ID versus the name, because the name likely will change based on the event or what's happening with the copy and the promotion. So like I mentioned, this is our Google Sheet naming convention generator. So this is super nice to have, easy to share. We do have a lot of these fields locked down, so we force you to choose one of the options that we have in here. Again, we have like region, we have the different channel types. So this is going to be the online event, the digital asset, translate into our tier 1 countries. So we do put language in if it's going to be an event. It makes it a little cleaner for reporting. This one is event, so we do put the date in there, so year, month, day. The next section is going to be the Salesforce campaign ID, just so it has the ID so it can easily search. The next one is going to be the priority. So we do have a rank 1 through 4 for all of our priorities. So if it's a welcome email or asset, that's going to be a P1. A launch event will also be a P1. Any live event would be a P2. This third one, I think, is just, this is just the product name. So we are a global company. We have multiple products. So this is the product name. And then the last piece is just the name of the event or the name of the asset. So once this is done, on the next line, line 7, you can see the final naming convention, the output. So this is what we take and put into Marketo. So now we know this is exactly the same format as everything else in Marketo, and we know what we're following. And then this last piece here, this is just the back end values where we make sure that we lock it. No one has access to this besides our Marketo admins. So if there's any changes, we can do it directly in here. Otherwise, everybody just has access to this first tab, and they can't make any changes to the calculator. Obviously, when you copy and paste it into Marketo, you can definitely make changes, but we go on the honor system. So hopefully when you copy and paste that into Marketo, you're not making any of those major changes. All right, so moving on from the naming convention, if you have attended any of my previous, Adobe Summit in 2020, I believe it was 2020, and a couple other Marketo events in 2019. For some reason, I always go back to Request Campaign. I don't know why I love this topic so much. It's very strange for someone to like, but I think there's a lot of hidden capabilities within this Request Campaign. And actually now there's also executable campaigns. So I'll go through Request Campaign and I'll talk about executable campaigns just because there's a lot of things that you can do with it that will speed up your Marketo instance. So for those of you that know Request Campaign, it allows you to place people into a specific campaign in a flow step. I think I actually don't have a screenshot of this one, but it just basically allows you to, in the flow step, a good example would be state normalization, right? If you have state that's coming into the system and it's spelled California, but in Salesforce, it has to be CA. You can always have a request campaign that will call that state normalization campaign if it doesn't match what you need. So that's a really good example of how we use request campaign. Obviously, we have a pick list in Salesforce. State has to be abbreviated. So anything that comes in with it not being abbreviated, we do a request campaign to clean up that state before it actually goes into Salesforce. How to use it? Place a request campaign in the flow step of a smart campaign, and then you have to pair it with a campaign as requested trigger. So it's essentially a chain and a hook. The request campaign is a chain. Sorry, the campaign is requested trigger is a chain, and the request campaign is a hook. So once you request the campaign, that's where it goes through, and now it calls the other campaign. Use cases: data processing, persons created, data standardization, privacy, opt-in processing. And in here is a link to the 2020 Adobe Summit, where I spent an entire hour going through the power of request campaign. It is a little old now, just because the executable campaign did come out I think like 2 months ago. So there's a lot of things that we went through in that presentation that you can definitely use request campaign, but executable campaigns are significantly better, and I'll go through why it's better in just a second. So feel free to watch that session, and then there's also in the next slide, I did a blog post to compare the power of request campaign as well as executable campaign, so you can use that to kind of compare and contrast and see what really works better for you in your use case. So executable campaign is by far the most, I think it's the best feature that Marketo has released in the last year. I know with the Adobe acquisition, they haven't been releasing as many new enhancements, but this is one of the cooler ones that I think Marketo really released that's helpful for everybody. So what is it? It's essentially campaign as requested on steroids. It does the exact same thing as campaign as requested. In the flow step, you would just say, instead of doing request campaign, it's going to be execute campaign. The main difference here is it does go in order. So I'm not going to spend too much time on what is in the blog post, but the blog post kind of shows the two different scenarios. So with the request campaign, if I request 3 different campaigns, if I do a lead processing campaign, a data normalization, and then a sync to Salesforce campaign, and I request all 3 of those, they're all going to request at the same time. So if you need something to go in a very specific order, campaign as requested is not for you. There are some workarounds in that presentation. Again, we spent an hour talking through this, where you can say, request one campaign, have it flow. At the end of that campaign, request another, have that flow. At the end of that one, request another. Very difficult to try to troubleshoot. It's almost impossible to try to find mistakes. But this is where executable campaigns really come in and allow you to say, I want a lead to go through our processing campaigns. After that, it needs to go through our normalization. After that, it needs to get sent a specific email based on the data processing campaigns, and then sync to Salesforce. So this really allows you to force things to go in a very specific order, and it's not going to go on to the next one until the previous step has finished. So how to use it? When you create a smart campaign, there's a new checkbox on that little pop-up window that's executable. So just make sure that checkbox is checked. When you create the smart campaign, it's automatically activated. And then again, just like the request campaign, you have to have the chain and the hook, right? So you have to have that smart campaign in the flow that says execute campaign, and then you have to choose the executable campaign that you just created. Order of operations, kind of make sure you do the smart campaign that's being executed first. You can't select it unless it's actually created. So you have to create that campaign first, and then you go back to the campaign that's executing it, and that's where you'd put in the flow step to execute that campaign. Again, kind of the same use cases. I think the biggest selling point for the executable campaign here is really the ability to do daisy chaining. In the past, at Pulse Networks, we used to do request campaign for every single thing. Obviously, with the number of activities that we had running in the system, it's going to slow things down. Email campaigns are always prioritized within Marketo. So we were seeing the welcome email get sent before the country was normalized. And now we thought, this person was in a double opt-in country because they spelled United States wrong, but really it was United States, so they're not double opt-in. So now we're able to make sure the data is clean, it goes in the order that we need it to, and then the email is sent out once everything is completed. So really powerful tool. All right, and then moving on, this is actually kind of going back to the request campaign and executable campaign, is just to really limit the number of redundant triggers that you have in the system. I've made this mistake. I know a ton of people have also done this where, it's just easy to create a new smart campaign for a specific use case. Lead is created is a very common thing where it's like, oh yeah, like the lead is created, I want to go through this. So I'm just gonna create a new trigger for lead is created and have it go through that single trigger for the single source. It's great to do that a couple of times, but when you have, 10,000 triggers in the system, it's gonna slow things down. So we try to make sure that, there's only, you can see on the screen here, we only have 3 triggers in Marketo that use a lead is created trigger. Everything is then triggered off of these. So it allows us to really clean the system, make sure that when a lead is created, there's not 5 million things happening to that lead. We know it's going to go down this processing campaign. And you can see the little blue logo here. So that's going to be, this signifies as the executable campaign. So you can see here, once that lead is created, now we're executing 10, 15 different flow steps based on that one single lead is created trigger. And you can see the reason we have 3 different ones is, there's 3 different use cases. One is for marketing lead, one is for M&A acquisitions, and then another is for BDR sales outreach. We just put our BDR leads through a different process. So everything else would go through one of those 3 triggers within Marketo. All right. So within Marketo, another thing that I didn't really care too much about when I was at Logarithm, just because we weren't doing a lot of things custom. But as I've moved to Palo Networks and we're growing, we're trying to find other ways of using Marketo kind of out of the box. Channels, tags, and statuses have become very important. So channels and statuses are kind of, basic Marketo. Everybody has different statuses and channels within Marketo. Obviously, you're going to have one for events, probably one for email. This is, your more common setup within Marketo. A couple things that we've started to do is we do have a reset status in a lot of our different channels, just because we want to be able to reset a lead if we have a trigger set up based on the status changing. So one thing, all of our leads get added to a static list when they become a responder within Marketo. Sometimes that static list, we're using an API, sometimes that API goes down. And we just want to reset these leads. So the easiest thing that we do is we just, change their status back to reset, goes back to a 0 progression and goes through the entire flow again. I would say this is more for operational programs. I wouldn't necessarily use this for events or anything like that. But if you have an operational program, you would just tie this back into the operational channel and be able to reset leads without having to do a ton of different work within that lead or within different flow steps. Actually, I skipped one, progression statuses, save hours of headache. This is a huge thing for events. You don't want to have someone go from attended back to registered, no show back to registered. So definitely use those progression statuses. I like to do them in groups of 10, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That way, if you have a new status between 40 and 50, you don't have to go and renumber every single one. You have that incremental step. So you can just say, this new one is 45. So now you have the ability to add multiple statuses without having to renumber and change every single thing within the progression status. And then tags. So tags, we never really use tags much. I never used RCE. Now we do. So tags are pretty helpful for RCA metrics. But tags are also very helpful for using the API. So we use Marketo API like crazy. It allows us to have a little bit more customization with what we're doing outside of Marketo. We use a different ETL tool to transform data, push it back to Marketo. So tags help us, it really allows us to search for Marketo programs a different way. So we tag everything based on region. I have a screenshot. Yep. So region, different statuses, what theater that they're in, event type. So like I said, we use Splash. We also use On24 and Zoom. So every Splash program will have a tag, what type of webinar it is. So when we're doing API pulls, we can say, all right, I want Splash tag equals On24, theater equals NAM, and region equals United States. So that way we're able to define what we're searching for without having to download everything and then manually go through one by one. It just helps with the API and allows us to get the data out a lot easier. And then tokens. Again, tokens is kind of another thing like Request Campaign. I actually did an entire 30-minute session on tokens. Don't ask me what I talked about because I don't really remember, but I somehow talked for 30 minutes on tokens. So tokens, I love tokens because it makes it easy to update things. I think copyright year and company name are one of the easiest ones to do. So all of our emails, all of our landing pages, obviously have tokens for copyright year and name. Every year you have to go through and update the copyright year to go to the next year. Instead of having to update the template or every program that uses it, you can just have a folder level token at that highest level folder and update the year in there or update anything that you need. We use it for address as well. So if we have a landing page or an email going out to an EMEA region, we have our location for Amsterdam, Japan, very specific for Japan. Anything that's in Japanese will always have our local office in Japan. It just makes it easier for the prospects to connect to that office and know where they're coming from. Program tokens, event location, time, address. It makes it easy, especially when you're doing follow-up emails or invites. You only have to put it in once, just put in the token, then you can reference that token in all of the emails in that event program. Asset links and UTM tokens. So this is actually funny because I did not follow this advice. Well, we didn't follow this advice because this morning alone, we had an instance where our UTMs, we found an email where the UTMs aren't actually in a token, and I had to go update about 50 different emails because we had an invalid UTM token. So definitely keep your asset links and tokens separated within Marketo, just because the UTM tokens, you just have to update it once, right? UTM medium is Marketo, or UTM source is Marketo, UTM medium is email. Our UTM campaign somehow got corrupted, so instead of having that one spot to go updating the token, I had to go into 50 different places. So this is why having that token just makes it significantly easier to keep things clean. And then my favorite, the token hack for line break. I think this blog is still active. I probably should have clicked on it. But Stanford created this awesome blog to create a line break token within Marketo. So the only time we use this is when we sync data to Salesforce. Historically, we do sync a lot of things to the notes field within the lead and the contact. Traditional Marketo, if you just use a token, it's going to keep writing the data after each other, and it's like a huge run-on sentence. But this line break token allows you to insert a line break into that field. So now you can have a very clean note section for your BDR SDR team to be able to read the notes. And it's not a giant run-on sentence and impossible to find anything. So that's definitely a great hack to implement. All right, and then the last section on here. Oh, forgot about the tokens. So I'm not sure how long Marketo Sky is going to be accessible, but this is one thing that I use quite a bit is you can import tokens using Marketo Sky. So I know as of today, Marketo Sky is still available. So you can click on the Sky logo from My Marketo. And if you want to import tokens from a different program, you can just go into the token section on the program or the folder, click import tokens, and then you can select another folder or program to import those tokens. This is really helpful when you want to create a new folder structure, but you don't want to go through and have to recreate all of the tokens from the previous structure. Now you can just import them from one folder program into another. So it helps save time, especially if you have 10, 20, 100 different tokens. We love tokens, so we have tokens for everything. So this saves a lot of time, and make sure there's no mistakes because you're essentially copying it from one asset to another. And then at the bottom here is another link to a presentation on tokens. Not sure if you have guessed it, but more tokens. All right, and then the last one, zip code lookup. So this is actually one thing that I haven't seen too many companies do. A lot of times when you go fill out a form, you have your standard questions. You have first name, last name, company name, email address. Depending if it's a large global company, a lot of times you're asking for a country and state. As we become a much larger company, we realize that a lot of our BDR assignments are actually done on zip code. And we did some research, and there's actually almost a one-to-one match between zip code and state. I think there's 8 zip codes in the entire United States that share 2 states. They're very small. We looked at all 8 of them, and there's not a lot of big businesses. They're all, right on the border of 2 states. A lot of times they're just fast food companies or smaller restaurants. So we decided that instead of asking for state on our forms, we're actually going to ask for zip code. And then within Marketo, we created a mapping document. So we did, there's a database out there that you can find all of the zip codes for every state. We put it into a smart campaign. So now when we ask for zip code on our forms, we're actually getting 2 data points. Now we're getting state and zip code because we know your zip code, so we can infer the state directly from there. We found that our conversion rates did go up by doing this. It's a lot easier to type in a zip code. It's more natural. It's a 5-digit zip code versus having to click the drop down for state, find your state. It's just mentally, it's a little quicker to do zip code. And a lot of times the pre-fill on your form is going to pre-populate it. So it just makes it easier to submit the form. So that's one thing that we found worked really well. And we do this for United States, Canada, and Germany. The UK also has a very similar zip code structure. There's just a ton of zip codes in the UK, so we didn't build that one out quite yet. But for the United States, there's only 50 groups right for the 50 states, so it makes it a lot easier to build this out. All right, and then next couple sections, this is just some hacks that I've learned along the way using Marketo. The first one is campaign queue. So this one we use all the time. We're a huge company, so we have a ton of triggers going in Marketo. This is a very accurate representation of what our campaign queue typically looks like. So what you can see here is you can see everything that's happening within the instance. So by going to the marketing activities tab, and then clicking on campaign queue at the top, you can see what's happening in the system. It's a great detection to see if there's a bottleneck or if there's something happening that shouldn't be happening. Typically it's like, why is Marketo so slow? This is the first thing that we always go look at to see if maybe there's a huge smart campaign that's running. It allows us to troubleshoot it. You can also, if you're using campaigns requested, it makes it really easy to see bottlenecks. Executable campaigns, you don't see as much because one thing has to happen before the other. So that makes it a lot cleaner. But for campaign as requested, definitely one thing to take a look at to see, is my system running efficiently? If it is, great. If not, you're going to have a huge backlog. 113 for us isn't bad. For a smaller company, this would definitely be something to take a look at. For us, when it gets up to 5,000, 6,000, then we know we have a problem. So definitely know the size of your company and what you're looking for. Again, like at Logarithm, when I was looking at this would be a huge indication of an issue. But you can also see how many leads are being affected. So over here in this column, these are all 1s and 2s. So it's going to clear pretty quickly. The issue is when you have 100,000 leads, 1 million leads going through Smart Campaign, that's when there's an issue. Campaign sync stats. So kind of another one, I guess this should be status, not stats. But this is kind of a newer feature. I think it came out last year. So you can go in here and see what's happening with your Salesforce sync. Again, as you know, a larger company, we're always seeing like, hey, why isn't this lead over in Salesforce? Before this presentation started, I got a Slack message from someone. We launched a new web page today. It's like, hey, filled out the test form a couple of times. I'm not in Salesforce. It makes it a lot easier to be able to go here and see, oh, yep, we're updating, 80 leads. This one completed. That campaign member creation started at or finished at 11:16. So one should be starting again in a few minutes. Also makes it very obvious when there's an issue. So the native Marketo to Salesforce sync can sync about 10,000 records an hour. If you're updating 10,000 people, either new or updated, it's going to take a while. So now going in here, you can see exactly when it started, when it ended. You can see this person's status sync took about 2 seconds, right? So that's awesome. But if it's within like 10, 15 minutes, that's where it's like, maybe work with Marketo support to see what you can use to optimize it. Maybe you have too many sync people to Salesforce triggers happening. So this is a good indication of things to take a look at if your system is slow. All right. System settings and alerts. Again, as a Marketo admin, I kind of need to know what's happening in the system. A lot of times, leads are coming over with weird data. So we do have alerts set up in Marketo to, sync errors, API errors, pick list validation errors. We have a very large marketing team, a very large IT team. A lot of times, a pick list value might change without us getting notified. So having these alerts turned on within your settings definitely is an early indication and allows you to troubleshoot issues right away. Again, this happens a lot where, let's add a new picklist value and they forgot to tell us. So this allows us to get an email right away, can reach out to IT, update our processing to make sure that we have all of the accurate values for that picklist. API errors is huge for us. Again, we use the API pretty heavily. So having this notification turned on for API errors allows us to catch any issues as it's happening. And then web service is a good one, especially if you're using On24 Zoom native integrations. Allows you to get notified when things are breaking or not syncing accurately. Cool. And then smart campaign limits. So this is one thing I learned very early on to create a smart campaign limit. So when I started using Marketo, I was an intern, made a couple of very large mistakes. The HBO intern is a great example where they sent an email to their entire HBO database. I did that. Definitely had that happen in my last company where I accidentally sent an email. I missed a and or filter somewhere, and the email went to everybody, right? So putting a limit on smart campaigns really helps you prevent emails to the entire database. A lot of times you're not going to be emailing the entire database, so there's no reason that there shouldn't be a limit on a smart campaign. Our limit is about 10%. So if we have 5 million records in the database, our smart campaign limit is 500,000, just because the chances of us sending an email that large, pretty slim. And you can always go through and on an individual smart campaign, you can go through and override it. So you don't have, it's not a limit, it's like an end all be all limit for everything. But this screenshot here kind of shows how you'd be able to edit that smart campaign limit for an individual campaign. So this limit is 640,000. If I want to add it, to be 6.4 million, it's very easy to go in, update it for just this one smart campaign. But for everybody else, it's going to be 640,000. So this has definitely saved us a couple times, especially as our company's growing. As an admin, I get an alert every time a limit has been breached. So if someone tries to run a campaign and it failed because there's a million people on that list, but they didn't update the limit, all the admins will get an email. So it just allows us to have a little bit more control over the system to make sure that we're not sending something out to the entire database. And the other thing too is it's not just email sends, it's also deletions. If someone wants to mass update all of the records, that needs to go through us, the Marketo admin. So this allows us to put a limit on that, to make sure someone's not, mass editing, making deletions to the database. So we'll get the alert when that fails. And then one thing that isn't on the slides that I also like to talk through is making sure you don't have any triggers to auto delete. Again, as an intern, I did not realize how powerful Marketo was, and I accidentally blacklisted the entire database. So again, if I had the Smart Campaign limit set up in that instance, I would not have been able to blacklist the entire database, but I did. And then I randomly checked the lead database. I'm like, why is our database getting smaller? And it turns out there's actually a trigger that when someone is changed from blacklisted as false to true, it deletes their record. So by blacklisting the entire database, I almost accidentally deleted our entire database within Marketo. So that's one thing that I've learned very quickly is try not to do any triggers to auto delete people. If you need to delete people, maybe do a batch where it runs once a month where you check it first, because once you delete records, it's very hard. Marketo support can technically bring them back, but you do lose activity from the last backup to when you deleted them. So if the backup was Saturday, you deleted them the following Sunday, or the following Saturday, you just lost an entire week of activity. So definitely don't have any triggers that will auto delete. Learn that one the hard way. And then as a security company, we definitely have security on our mind. So I think this is actually really helpful for a lot of other companies as well. Just setting up weekly, monthly, and quarterly checks of your Marketo instance. The first one that we do is a weekly login history. So this, as a security company, we want to make sure that our credentials haven't been breached or someone's not accessing Marketo that shouldn't be. So we do look at login history. And IP history. If it's, if the IP address looks strange or it keeps rotating, we'll reach out to the end user and be like, hey, we notice your IP address has been rotating. We want you to change your password. We don't do as much of this anymore because we do use single sign-on. But before that, this was big where we could see someone logged in one state and then they logged in another one. Obviously people do travel, but it was just one of those things where if it looks unusual, we do call it out just to make sure that Marketo is secure, because there's a lot of damage you can do in Marketo. You can send emails to people you don't want to. You can change landing pages, change emails. So I just want to make sure that that's secure. Lead performance report just to check to see how the database is looking. If there's a sudden increase in leads, take a look to see maybe it's a bot attack. Maybe someone uploaded a huge list that they shouldn't have. So we do look at that weekly just to make sure the data is looking good. Again, data review, kind of the same thing as lead performance, just more on a month-over-month basis. Email performance report to make sure we're not hitting a lot of traps, spam traps or unsubscribes. Landing page performance report. Again, we look at it monthly just to make sure that we don't have a ton of active landing pages that are getting no traction. We have a ton of landing pages, so this helps us clean them up, make sure that there's not a ton of things active that shouldn't. Obviously, when landing page is active, there's probably a trigger listening for that. So that's just another cleanup activity that we go through monthly on that report. And then quarterly, we do an audit outside of that monthly report. So then we look at a quarter basis, last quarter, how many people have gone to this landing page? Because a lot of times monthly isn't too helpful, especially if it's a new page. But if a page has been active for over a quarter and there's no activity, it's time to turn it off. And then email valid checks. Obviously, Marketo does a pretty good job on forms that you have to have an @ sign and a period. Unfortunately, the validation isn't on list uploads or if someone sends it through the API. So this is just something that we do to make sure that we're not emailing people with an invalid email, because bounces are never good for the system. So we pull them out immediately. Pick list values. So this is going back to the campaigns requested, executable campaigns, where we do have smart campaigns in the system that are listening for invalid data, clean them up, push them through standardization before we do sync it over to Salesforce. And then bots. So we do have a trigger that, if one person fills out a form, 50 different forms are the same form 50 times within 10 minutes, we get an email alert, add them to a static list where we keep them separate, add them to a segment, a spam segment, because we don't want them to get emailed. just because, people suck, people have a lot of time on their hands, and they think that attacking Marketo forms is fun. Don't know why, but they're out there. It's not fun for any of us. All right, and then the last one, or I guess there's two left, but this one is going to be the test. So list naming and static list. So if I am creating a list in Marketo called, this one's a little older, right? So Chicago mug invite list with the dates, and I upload 10 brand new people to this list, but then I change the name to have a different date. So instead of 6/30 to 7/1, what happens? So if I have to pull a report, what's going to happen when I pull it's not switching, come on. There we go. Pull a list of all leads created from that list. No one's going to show up because Marketo, unfortunately, stamps a static list name. So if I upload those 10 people to this list, Marketo is going to stamp it with a 2020.6.30. And then I change the name. Those 10 people will not change the name to 7.1. It's going to stay the 6/30. So this is kind of one of those little gotchas with Marketo that, I understand why they did it. They want it to be stamped, but, if things change, so naming convention changes, program name changes, it's not going to update everything in the system. So having a record either in the notes of, in Marketo, you can have the list name and then a note, there's a note section under it. We always put the previous name and the new name there because if we had people in there, because this is a headache. Right now, it's like, oh, I just lost those 10 people because we were pulling a report based on who is created from that list, and the name changes. Now your reporting is different. So that's one of the little gotchas with Marketo. And then the last one, which is something I didn't know until last year, which is actually really cool. With Gmail, you can use a plus sign and a dot to create new records in Marketo, but still have the email sent to you. So in this example, my email address is kmccormick@palatonetworks.com. We use Gmail. So if I'm testing something in Marketo, as long as I keep I guess it's a prefix before the sign, and then I do either a plus and I add something after that, Gmail will actually recognize that as my real email address. So the plus sign, Gmail doesn't recognize anything after the plus. So it'll still go to your normal email address. So this is super helpful when you're testing things. I have 50 different records in Marketo, and they're all K McCormick plus EMEA, K McCormick plus North America, K McCormick plus Japan, and then I do like EMEA MAL for marketing accepted lead, MEL for marketing engaged lead. So if I'm testing, if I want to test multiple flows, this allows me to create new records within Marketo, but I can still receive the actual emails that Marketo is sending because Marketo will send it to the K McCormick plus Marketo mug at palatonetworks.com, but Gmail will just see that as my real email address. And the same thing with periods too. So if I want to do k.m.c Cormick at palatonetworks.com, the dots don't exist in Gmail's little world. So the dots will be ignored. Marketo won't ignore it because then Marketo is a new email address. That's a new record, but the email will still be able to get sent to your Gmail. So this is super helpful in testing new flows, testing emails, event registration, basically anything that you need to test in Marketo for a new record, but still get the email sent. This is a great little hack to know. Cool. And then at the end here, I just put a list of links. So line break token is in here. This one is actually old. I'll remove this one. Mops for a Slack channel, great resource that's free that you can go to and chat with people about marketing operations. The recent blog post on executable campaign versus campaigns requested. And then MopsCon is coming up in September, so I'll be presenting in that as well. That one's more of a how to set up your marketing team between an enterprise and a startup. Also product-led growth versus traditional growth. So it's a great session. Highly recommend attending.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kyle. We will stop the recording so we can get to the questions.